Hello and welcome to the DM's Book Club, a podcast where we read about some Dungeons and Dragons and discuss how we might include it in our campaigns. This is episode 17, and with me, as always, I'm Fiona. Well, it's too early in the morning. I can't even remember my own name, Ryan. I'll start again. My name is Fiona, and with me, as always, is Ryan, my co-host who gets me up really early to do these recordings. How are you, Ryan?
I'm good. How are you? Apart from being tired and out of it.
Oh, it's fine. You know, what else would I do on a Sunday? You know.
Basically, the behind the scenes is I'm really, really, really unreliable and keep moving the appointment around. So, you know, have sympathy for Fiona. She's being woken up at all times of the morning to film this. It's a labor of love. You should appreciate everything this podcast gives you.
Exactly so. I mean, we've got a few people that are following. Like I said, we've got over I think it was like over 400 downloads in the last month. So actually, we're doing all right. Yeah,
that's amazing.
I know people apparently really enjoy listening to us and chatting to us. Well, us chatting to each other and not chatting to us yet.
Either that or it's 400 phone calls we need to make to sort of check in on people and say, are you sure you're okay? This is a strange thing to want to listen to. No, that's really cool. It's weird when people start to listen because you start second guessing yourself. You start going, oh no, maybe I do need to know what I'm talking about. Have I actually got to really read into this?
I know. Sometimes, I don't know if you've ever seen like a YouTube streamers or something like that, and they say like, oh, this, but I don't know anything about it yet. Oh, you've had plenty of time to read up on X, Y, or Z. And then it comes to this and I go, oh God, I did read it like 2 weeks ago. And
I know. I'm supposed to know what I'm talking about. And I'm looking at this and going, hang on. Was this the chapter I said I would read? I'm pretty sure it's not. It's something totally different.
What a good segue, Ryan. So tell us, what is the chapter we're looking at today?
All right. So Dungeons and Dragons as a game has been associated with three things, I think, for donkey's years. Dragons, which of course are very, very cool and important monsters and are brilliant, and I would recommend you put in any campaign. Mm-hmm. Dungeons, which you can use pre-built ones or you can make your own, and you know, you've got to give something that people need to skulk around in and work through in a campaign. But magical items and treasure is kind of that unspoken third thing that makes up any campaign and is really, really important to get right, because if you do, what you end up doing is putting a system in place where your players coming back week after week can be rewarded with effectively good play and progressing through your campaign with the best thing that everybody loves, money and cool stuff, which is essentially what this is.
Amazing. And no wonder they didn't call it Dungeons and Dragons and Treasure. I feel it was maybe a bit too long to put on the actual book, so they've had to like just shorten it to D&D.
But I think it's a mistake they made personally.
Oh, really? But at least, yeah, like you said, it is implied that, and I will say, yeah, most people are like, all right, but what do we get when we defeat the boss? What is it that if I go on this mission, what do I get out of it?
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, it's an interesting concept because in real life, sometimes you're like, oh no, I'll do that for free. That's fine. I'll help you out. But when you're an adventurer, that is your life and it's your career. So you want payment for in case there's any danger of certain death, I guess.
Well, exactly. It's all about the magnitude of the favors you're being asked. If I go, hey, Fee, do you mind going out and grabbing some milk for me? That's very different to, do you mind disposing with the cursed remains of the hobgoblin that was ransacking the town 3 days ago? Right. There's different levels of it, isn't there? So yeah, no, you're right. As a player, you have to think, if you're putting yourself into mortal danger week after week, what's the reward? Why would your character be doing it? And whether you have a selfish character or a character with really good intentions but needs the money to do whatever charitable or sort of holy act that they want to do, it all kind of plays in. And as players, there is something really satisfying when you've got a character sheet that not only has your level 8 paladin or whatever it is that's growing and gaining all these skills, but if you start getting magic weapons and magic items, there's something fun about that makes you go, yeah, I want to come back and use this now.
Also, for the record, Ryan, I would charge you to go get milk in this day and age, and depending on what kind of milk.
I keep making you buy it, and then I don't give you money for it, so it's even worse. That's the problem.
All right, and we'll give us a brief summary of this chapter. What is it about? Treasure or treasure tables? What is it about? I've got to be honest, I didn't know anything about it till I read the chapter. So
this very much is a sort of behind the scenes Dungeon Masters planning episode. This is something where if you've got typically a campaign or a one-shot that you are running yourself, that maybe you've made yourself or that you are massively changing behind the scenes, putting magical items and treasure into any scenario is quite a difficult thing, because if you are just thrown the Dungeon Master's Guide in front of you, there are hundreds of magical items, and there are all kinds of different types and consumables, non-consumables, different rarities, different uses and attunements and classes that you can have to sort of think about. So deciding what you put in a campaign or one shot is really tricky. And then deciding how much gold to put in is really tricky as well, because all of these things have a risk of unbalancing whatever campaign or scenario you're in. Although the book does take great pains to kind of tell you that actually sometimes being unbalanced isn't the worst thing in the world, and that is a totally other thing completely. But the idea behind these chapters is to give you the set of tools you need to put a nice average distributed amount of treasure through whatever scenarios you're doing, to give your party a really good sense of progression and building up and accumulating power, but B, to not unbalance it so much that your level 3 rogue is running through the dungeon with the Holy Avenger, like legendary greatsword of slaying demon dragons and thinking, oh, I probably got that roll a bit wrong. And it's actually really, really good. What he does is the sort of chapter 7 treasure effectively splits everything that a character could get down into component parts such as money and treasure and then magical items, and then splits them into what I call treasure hoards and treasure tables, and then gives you really good information about what sort of frequency you should be seeing and then how to distribute it through a campaign.
When I read this through, I saw the on average, how often a party finds treasure, and I was actually quite shocked because it seems quite low according to this book. So on average, the party finds treasures like 7 times at a lower level, 18 times at in a mid-tier level, and then on is about another 20 times. So in total, they should only be finding treasure about under 50 times. But then it makes sense, because I guess for me, obviously, you don't find treasure at the end of every session or at the end of every sort of dungeon, because you might have to go back and get stuff. But it just seemed quite low. But then maybe that's just me. I guess I just reward players too quickly, or because I play one shots, I'm always giving out treasure, I guess.
Well, I think that's treasure hoards, if that makes sense. Yeah. It's 50 hoards where each hoard may have multiple magic items or none at all. But on average, they will have lots and lots of different bits and pieces. But it all sort of stems from how 5th edition has been built, and it's very different to other D&D versions that I've played. The idea behind magic items is that you can't just walk into a shop or city and buy and sell items like they were in a high expensive, Harrods or whatever it is. Like, they are rare items that it hints that whatever law or ability or mechanism has been used to make these items has been lost or eroded over time. So these things are kind of one-of-a-kind artifacts and sort of special things, and you'll find them, but you can't go out and just sort of buy them. The 5th edition tries to give a sense of rarity and randomness to what you might pick up. Now, I know that when we play Dungeons and Dragons, often as a DM, I sort of home rule it a little bit and introduce more shops and trading and that sort of thing. But as it's written, you're not supposed to be able to just walk into a city and go, aha, I will take that +2 longsword. All these things are supposed to be quite rare and random. And that's where the treasure hoards come in. And I think that's actually, you're right. It's a really good place to start to get it in your head as to how often you should be seeing these things. I mean, there are 4 different types of treasure hoard, and it all is based on the challenge rating of whatever you are dealing with. So it goes from really small challenges of 0 to 4. You've got 5 to 10, you've got 11 to 16, and then 17 plus. If you're up at 17 plus, you're fighting world-threatening threats. If you're doing 0 to 4, you're probably dealing with a goblin in your basement. So there's different levels of risk there. And as you're right, you're supposed to sort of have a certain average amount of it. And I look at it because we've done campaigns for a long time, right? And we've had this long running campaign. We've been playing for over 2 years now. It's pushing like a long time. And working out how many magic items to give you guys is really tough, because if I give you too many, then that kind of skews the campaign for a very long period of time. So if the one I sort of was looking at, and we talked before about how most campaigns and one shots are within that 5 to 10 level bracket. That seems to be the sweet spot of D&D, level 5 to level 10. But if we have a look at that, 18 rolls on the challenge 5 to 10 table. So the way I think about that is between levels 5 to 10, you've got 6 levels, right? You've got 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you've got 18 rolls on the challenge table. So that works out roughly every level that you give your characters, you should be having 3 rolls on the challenge table. And that's kind of how I work it out.
That actually does make a lot more sense. I guess it just I guess it was just more like when you're an adventurer, I guess it's that sort of thing where even in a fantasy world, everything is run by capitalism, or you are funded by in some way. One thing I did find really helpful, because again, it's that sort of thing. It's like you said, it's like either treasure or hoards, where you get the loot essentially once you defeated the big bad, and you're like, hooray! What have they got in their wardrobes, and what have they got in their cupboards? But what I quite liked, it did define sort of like 4 different types of hoard in a random paragraph, I think. Like you get the contents belonging to one creature, a group of creatures, a hoard that no one uses, it's just left there in a dungeon that's forgotten about, and then a gift from a benefactor. And those are sort of the main 4 places where you would get a sizable amount of reward. I actually thought that was really useful, because again, that's the sort of thing, it's like, well, where do you start? And then it actually just narrows it down to 4 main options, and then you can proceed from there. I thought that was quite good.
Exactly. And it's up to you as a DM to use your imagination as to how you want to throw these things. Because if you look at the tables, it is basically a chapter just with tables upon tables and rolling lots of dice. Like if we have a look at the challenge rating 0 to 4 treasure hoard, you may roll a 50 on a D100, which you then look at across and you're like, okay, that's 2D4, 25 gold pieces, art objects, fine. Well, I mean, you look at the art object tables and you're sort of looking at that and going, oh, well, that's maybe a small gold bracelet and a pair of engraved bone dice. And you're like, okay, that's fine. And then you go along the table a bit more and you're like, okay, that's 1d6 times on magic table A, and you have to roll those. And you think, well, what am I going to do just at the end of the campaign? Is it just sat in a room where you're like, oh, yay, you have done the challenge. You've gone into the treasure room and your characters move through and just get given it? Or as you say, can you be more constructive with it? If there's loads of potions on the treasure table, for instance, are your players stumbling across a warehouse that used to contain this stuff, an alchemist who was experimenting and had some spare supplies, a villain who keeps all of these potions on them in order to use them? Maybe your characters were given them as part payment up front to go and do whatever dungeon is being given of them. There's all kinds of ways you can do it, and really it's up to your imagination to sort of put a way in. The one thing I would say with the treasure hoards, it's not written particularly clearly, I don't think, but the idea behind treasure hoards is that it's given more than your characters will end up needing, because your characters may not find it all. And that's a difficult one, because I hate rolling treasure and then seeing you guys walk past it. Yeah, exactly. And then never picking it up, because sometimes if you haven't described something well, or maybe the dungeon layout you put together as a DM isn't necessarily intuitive, you may just watch your characters walk past what you thought was a really obvious segue and going, oh, well, that was the legendary sword that was well suited to one of my characters I put in there. And then you sort of think about it. So maybe you need to sort of tweak it. But the idea is that you aren't supposed to pick up absolutely everything. So, use a sort of a sense of whether or not you think people are going to do stuff, and reward intuitive behavior and successful behavior. If you've got loads and loads and loads of treasure, maybe set half of that treasure aside to a side goal that you're making clear is, oh, look, you're going through a dungeon and what you've got to do is kill all the goblins. And when you kill the goblins, here's half the treasure. But as you're going through, you see an ominous, scary-looking staircase going down into something much deeper and darker, and you think you hear the sound of a gold golem walking around, or whatever it is. Yeah, exactly. Give them the option to sort of to really push and get that other half of the loot.
Now I'm questioning every decision I've ever made in our campaign, Ryan, as a result.
Oh, that's good.
I think, but this is the thing, because I'm sure you're like me. Sometimes you watch streams of Let's Plays and stuff like that, and you see, like for example, I've been watching a lot of Resident Evil 4 Let's Play, because I'm going to play it myself at some point, so I need to be prepared. But it's so interesting, because obviously people have played this game so many times, and then they'll comment saying, oh no, you've missed the magnum that's in this, you need to go back and get it. And obviously then that changes the gameplay. You're influencing the gameplay. that's actually quite fascinating to know that in your head you're like, oh god, they've missed it, can't do anything about it. I guess like I would see that as more as an Easter egg sort of thing. I can imagine it being frustrating. You're like, oh, if only you just went a little bit further. But actually, I don't know. I think I revel in that, Graham. I think you've done it to us once where you've gone, oh, that's a shame, and then you just moved a piece of paper away. We're like, wait, what? What's wrong?
I do. Yeah, exactly. And it's all about, you have to lure enough things in front of the players to really immerse them in the world you're building anyway, but specifically to kind of taunt them with whatever treasure you're putting in. And if they don't know it's there because you haven't really described it very well, that's kind of not very fair on everybody. But if you've set like a puzzle in front of somebody and said, well, here's all the treasure, but now the room is flooding and they don't pick up everything, but that was because of how the dice fell or because of how their decisions were during whatever sort of mini encounter you've got, that's different. You can taunt them with that. And I have always been a fan that in D&D, sometimes the failures and the things that go wrong are the things that really spur people on and really push them to coming back next time, because you think, oh, you know, I saw that huge diamond and it was about 10 feet in front of me when the gate shut and the whole room disappeared, and you went, oh, no, I could have done that. Exactly. And that's what draws people back rather than just success all the time of guaranteed winning.
Just to go back to a point you sort of briefly glossed over, but so there's 4 types of treasure as well. So obviously there's your coins, you've got your gemstones and magic items. But the one I always forget about, and I think it's the most interesting category, is the art objects. So essentially they just appear and it's like, here is a portrait of an unknown noble. And you're like, ooh. And I think, again, we've done it in our campaigns and in one-shots where you've described something which you know is a throwaway object of 25 gold pieces or whatever. But I've had players go, but what does it mean? It must be the answer to some puzzle. Well, I'll hold on to it for ages. And you're like, no, just get rid of it. It's just taking up slots in your inventory. But the tables for both the art objects and the gemstones are really interesting because my knowledge of gemstones, as you can tell, Brian, is pretty much up there. I know you got your opals, you got your but actually having them out in rarities and in like, oh well, a ruby will be 55,000 pieces, but a portrait or a necklace like this, and you're like, again, it's that something. It's a nice flavor to stuff. But if you over flavor it, or you just go, oh, and it's got beautiful thing, and you're like, oh, well, there must be some proper meaning behind things. And I think that's what people sometimes do fall into the trap, because then you're spending ages like looking at stuff. And eventually, I've definitely done that as a DM going, well, roll a check. And regardless of what it goes, no, you think it's definitely just a necklace and you should move on from the current conversation of 10 minutes.
But, I mean, that's always an interesting one, because art objects, if they are given as a reward, an art object is basically just anything with value that has been made for a silly purpose. So anything from, as you say, jewelry to portraits to statues to whatever. It might like a music box that plays something lost. But what if, expanding on your point, you make the art object actually intrinsically important to what they're doing? So if they were going through and unlocking a door to the boss room, and you need the typical video game 3 keys to sort of do it, and one of the keys is made of solid platinum, and one is gold with rubies in the pommel of the key, and one is silver with emeralds and sapphires and everything like that. And then they open the door and you say, great, the keys are still in the door. And they go, oh, well, can we keep the keys? And you're like, yeah, of course. They're all worth 750 gold each. And they go, oh.
Sweet, I'll just take that. Yeah.
Exactly. You don't necessarily have to make it like a one or the other thing. The art objects can be actually intrinsically important to whatever they were doing. But then you're like, well, you still have this golden crown. Do you want to keep it? It's made of solid gold. And you're like, okay, yes, I absolutely will.
That's an interesting point you make. So, because again, as you know, in Tomb of Horrors, it's laden with treasure, but a lot of it is either cursed or it gets stuck in something. There's one really early on where there's like a gargoyle of some sort, and it has like a little indentation in one of its hands, and you've just happened to pick up this necklace filled with gemstones, and you have to put each gemstone in it, and it crushes it, and then when you do, it opens something else. But it is describing in great detail. It goes, oh yeah, the gemstones are worth quite a lot of money, but in order to proceed, it's basically like was it one of those what are they called, like microtransactions to get on to the next patch.
Exactly. The Tomb of Horrors was horrible though, because it's designed to really annoy people who know what they're doing. That's the thing. And I love it for that. But yeah, just watching your treasure disintegrate in front of you is just absolutely ridiculous.
It is that sort of thing where it's like you pay in order to proceed, but there might be more at the end, and which is true. But you've also got to fight, spoilers, a huge undead lich, or get out of there as quick as you can and take what you need.
One of the things I will say about treasure hoards, though, is especially when you get into the higher levels. So if we have a look at the 11 to 16 treasure hoard table, for instance, so this is kind of like second half of the game. Your characters are all level 10 or 11, and you're fighting that sort of thing. You roll on one of the treasure hoards, and don't forget we were saying you should have 2 or 3 hoards per level in the group. But this treasure hoard is saying at the top you should have 14,000 gold pieces. And specifically, it talks about gold earlier as to having a weight that you don't necessarily think about. But if you've got 14,000 gold pieces and it says 50 coins weigh £1, so effectively the treasure, what would that be, £280? I'm terrible at American weights and things, but that is like 100 kilograms at least of gold. You're sort of looking at it thinking, well, my party, unless they've got some sort of transportation, that's impossibly heavy. It's going to take ages. I mean, could you imagine going into a store with that much money? I think gemstones and magic items are a really good way to sort of consolidate that wealth down and say, okay, instead of having 14,000 golds worth of treasure, you've actually got 5,000 gold diamonds effectively, and your characters can actually hold them and put them in a pocket, and that's a bit more easy to transport.
It actually reminds me of when we could go on holiday and stuff. Like certainly when I was a kid, obviously you just have all your money in like physical cash and coins. Obviously now you're like, well, you could just have a contactless card, and it's like, oh my god, I don't have to carry around with me like various secret packages or secret things like tucked into your pants or anything like that. It's as you can tell, it revolutionized my life. If I was 14 again, I'd be like, well, I'm just going to use my travel card. But you're right, having a gold bar, it weighs a little bit, but it's going to be the same as all these other coins. So I totally see that. Going on back to your point about buying and selling magical items, I'm sure we'll go into the nitty-gritty of actual magical items in a second, but I thought this was really interesting. Something you did in our campaign when we got to our sort of first big, like, here is the city and we're going to spend a chapter here and stuff like that. You did a really cool thing with us as the players, where there is a magic shop called the Midnight Marvel, and we could roll on the magic table at least 3 times for each player, and there would be an item there that we have helped influence and be there, and that was really fun. I hadn't really experienced that before, because obviously there are certain things that you would have rolled for, but actually no, get them involved as well. I thought that was really, really cool.
And that effectively, that is a bit of a sort of home rule, but what I had is the shop that effectively had treasure hoards. So I would roll a treasure hoard in it that is identical to the treasure hoards that you guys were finding on your campaign, but it was like extra. So if you had 3 that level, the Midnight Marvel might have 2 or 3 more treasure hoards. But the difference is you would then have to buy or trade those magic items rather than just being given them. But it sort of is a way of introducing a little bit of randomness into the game and basically just sort of dropping things under your nose, which works perfectly when you have Wings of Flying that are ridiculously expensive and some members of the party just can't help themselves. It's just one of those things, really. But that's all I was doing. I was just going through the magic item tables and rolling random things and saying, this is what I've got in the store.
Yeah.
And it's all based on the specific magic tables. That's the thing. There's treasure hoard tables, which is what decides what you've got. And then the magic item tables specifically then digs down into what that hoard has. And then it's up to your imagination to try and work out how to put those into the game.
Yeah, because again, it says, you sort of said, it doesn't necessarily mean you have all these shops that do sell magic items, because magic items are rare. They're not really made anymore. They're just put around. And there was a really cool little line saying, well, plenty of people would like a magic sword, but few of them can afford it. And I was like, that is fair. Because again, it's that thing you just assume, like, well, I want to find this particular book, or I want to find this particular sword. You're like, oh, well, that's nice. Good luck,
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Magic items are supposed to be a representation of ridiculous wealth, and finding somebody who will be able to buy that or be able to trade it with you is a plot point in itself. You know, they're going to be incredibly wealthy or incredibly rich or incredibly evil in order to have amassed that much wealth. And you've got to actually go into the dark arts of selling a Banksy that may or may not explode, you know, to a buyer that may or may not shoot you. It's kind of half the fun of it, really.
That would be cool. Again, because it talks about invite-only auction houses and stuff like that. Like, you could have the magic shop, but what else could you do to flavor it? I love that idea of recreating that Banksy moment that you just said. Like, you buy the painting and you're like, hooray! And then it just starts to disintegrate. And you're like, oh no, but it's worth more. I don't understand. But hey.
Exactly. Plot point. Work out who did it and whether you were set up.
Oh, yeah, that sounds really cool.
Who is Banksy?
Introducing Banksy as a minor character in your campaign, just every so often scrawling things on the walls like, I am the knight, and then disappearing. Let's talk about magic items then, because obviously we sort of mentioned about it. What sort of things stand out for you for the magic items in general, I guess?
Magic items are basically a catch-all for anything that isn't gold or sort of an art object, effectively. It encompasses everything from what I would like to call consumables, such as potions and scrolls and things that you use up when you use them, to longer term magic items. And you have everything in sort of 5 different categories, from common, uncommon, rare, very rare, and legendary. So proper, using the same loot system that every game we know and love sort of picks up effectively. But legendary magic items are supposed to be the super rare artifacts of legend that will only appear in a campaign maybe a couple of times, that are ridiculously powerful and difficult to get and very expensive, all the way down to common magic items, which you may find in an average town being produced and represents, like a potion of healing, for instance, is a typical example of that one. So there's all kinds of different things you can get. A lot of it is clothing, armor, from boots to belts to helmets to sets of shields and whatever it might be. You also get weapons, so everything from swords to wands to staffs and everything like that. And then there are some really strange ones. I think, was it the apparatus of, I can never remember its name, but there are some really strange stuff in there that, you know, you'll roll on the table and you'll go, huh, what on earth is that? And you read the description and you go, huh, that does not help at all. That is really strange.
Yeah, I think it's that sort of, again, Clang improv. It's that sort of thing where you would roll stuff and go, how do I justify this being here at this time? Does it need to have a backstory? Does it not? And yeah, some of the things in here are like, ooh, where would this appear if it's not in a magic shop or an auction? It has to. I feel like and that's the thing. Sometimes it is more engaging to have a secret, like, sort of backstory in your head that the players maybe never find out about. But the one thing I did find was interesting. There's a whole section about like basically common sense, like can you wear multiple things of the same thing? Well, you can't wear 2 armors. You got to wear armor properly. Paired items will only work if they're both worn, which I thought was great, because clearly there's been some players all going, oh, well, I wear one boot on one foot and then I wear a different boot on the other, and I'm going to gain the benefits of both.
Everyone knows a player like that, and if you don't know anybody like that, it's you.
Yeah. Wait, what? But yeah, I thought that was quite good, and it does give that flexibility, and it's something we've actually seen in our own campaign. It's like, even when you have magical armor, you're like, oh, but it's made for a gnome, and I am a half orc, and he goes, oh, but it conveniently after a certain amount of time will grow and fit, but that's up to the DM's discretion as well, which I thought was quite good.
And that's the thing. A lot of the sort of this chapter gives sets of rules for this is how it should work, and then these are the optional rules to sort of spice around if you want magic items to be rarer or less rare or easy to use or harder to use or whatever it is. But the idea, as you say, is that every magical item should be available to be used by any player, as long as the item doesn't specifically tell you otherwise. So there are items in there that say you have to be a warlock or you have to be a dwarf or whatever it might be. But anybody can use anything once you've attuned to it, and that attuning takes a short rest effectively. That's one of the important things to remember as well, is that some magic items don't have attunement and anyone can just pick them up and use them as they are. But most magic items require attunement, which is a process where you spend a short rest essentially just prodding it until you kind of figure out how it works. But you can only be attuned to 3 things at once. And once you hit that 3, you have to drop something in order to attune to the next thing. And that sort of is a balancing system to stop people from running away with too many magical items apart from the Artificer, which we've spoken about before, but get more than 3 magical items, which is, DM dependent, hilariously fun.
Yeah, and you know what? That was something I never realized, that attunement was a short rest. I think for all the stuff we've ever attuned to, it's always been on a long rest. So that blew my mind slightly, that we could have just let's just stop for one moment, sit down for 20 minutes. And I never realized that.
That stemmed from me getting the rules wrong for about a year and a half.
Really?
I think it was somebody in a session was like, no, I'm pretty sure it's a short rest. And I was like, no, I'm almost certain it's a long rest. And thinking about it, when I read into it and went, bugger, I've been wrong on that for a long time. But then I just said I'm a DM, so what I say goes, and it was all great. So
I think that makes sense in a way. Like, I feel like magic items, maybe they take a little bit more to work out in general. So you don't want to necessarily want to use it for the next encounter or anything like that. I actually prefer it being on a long rest as a player, and as a DM, it just gives us a little more time to go, okay, let me just tweak anything I've got behind the scenes so that we can test it out. So yeah, I actually prefer it being a long rest. So.
Yeah, one thing I would think about when putting magic items in as well is that when you go through the table, there are certain magic items that tend to pop up in every campaign. Like a bag of holding is a really good example of something that people just like to pick up because it doesn't require attunement, and it basically avoids you having to worry about weight and carrying capacity, because it's like a portable dimension in a purse or rucksack or whatever it might be. But you want to give magic items a bit of distinct flavor, and you want to be able to give them a little bit of personality when you drop them into your campaign. So if you roll on the table and you get a +1 longsword, you can describe it as a +1 longsword, and your party look at the +1 dagger and +1 mace and +1 spear they've picked up to this point and go, oh, well, okay, it's just another thing, and pop it in the bag.
Yeah.
Exactly. Give it a name. Give it, call it the sort of, Zane's Wrath or whatever it might be. And give it a little bit of a background as to well, maybe the way it's been designed hints at a bit of a story and a bit of character, and maybe put it in the hands of a villain who uses it on the party before then dropping it, and then the party can pick it up and say, oh, well, I remember it from this. To this day, we have there was a +1 greatsword, I think, rolled on the treasure tables, and I was thinking, oh, well, how do I just put this into the game? This is just like a really random one. We weren't at a point in the story where you guys were really going through dungeons, or you weren't really picking up loot drops. It was very story based and travel based, and it was a bit difficult. So we ended up giving the greatsword to who was the villain at the time, a bloke called Vulcan.
Oh God!
And because of that, we made it as a really ostentatious commander's greatsword with black and red and just huge and gaudy and a real statement piece. Yeah. And to this day, the party refer to it as Vulcan's sword. You know. And they will hide it in plain sight, because it's really showy and gives away the identity of who owned it before, because this thing is ostentatious and ridiculous. It's still a +1 greatsword, so it's still very useful, but it just gives it a little bit more character.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there's tables at the back of the book as well that sort of, again, gives it that sort of special features. So the tables are sort of who created it or what was intended for, a detail from its history, what minor property does it have, and what quirk does it have. And again, this sort of goes into the sort of like you said, giving the flavor, giving backstory and stuff. I love the minor property table, because some of it is oh, it is conscientious, or it's gleaming. But then right at the end, on if you roll a 12 on a d20, it's songcraft. Whenever this item is struck or used to strike a foe, here's a fragment of the song. And again, I just thought, what songs could you sing? You could just be I don't know, Take On Me, or any sort of random sort of pop song. You just sing out phrases of it as it goes.
Yeah, exactly.
I absolutely love that. But yeah, and the quirk it has as well, which I think will probably lead on to sort of cursed items in general. It talks about it's confident, or it is frail, and then you got was it muttering, so you can hear it say something perhaps when you. So I like the idea. Go, what should we do next, sword? And it goes, oh, I don't fucking know. Try this lever. Oh, it's worked. So
yeah, and that's the thing. There's nothing will wind a player up and make them more suspicious of what's going on than putting a minor trait on a sword. Exactly. Because it can be totally innocuous, but if your sword goes, oh, not again, whenever your character fails a check, then you start going, oh no, why is it doing that? What's it thinking? Like, and is there a reason to this? And start second guessing themselves. And all it is just some minor table thing that you've done.
I think there's a weapon you could get in Borderlands. I think it was either the shield or a gun or something like that. And when you used it, it was like, no, please, ow, stop. And for ages I was like, God, what is making that noise? And I was like, oh no, it's my shield. It's just getting hit constantly.
I know. Please don't do that.
Ow.
I want to be peaceful. Exactly, but make it a +3 sword and just saying, oh no, this is going to be really, really annoying. I mean, yeah, you guys found what was a very rare magical item from a table, because when you roll through the treasure hoard tables, there are some rolls on them will give you really weak stuff. Some rolls will give you consumable stuff. And occasionally you get a roll that gives you a magic item that is of significant power. And you've got to think about those a little bit more as to how you put them into the campaign, because these things are very rare and probably have been found and used by people because, you know, why wouldn't you? And you guys found a rod of security, which is a very rare rod, like a sort of small staff that you can use to teleport the entire party to like a totally separate demi-plane, this separate realm of existence, where you can hide for, I think it's about 100 days or something silly. Like the party can 199 creatures and 199 days you've got. It just teleports you to a paradise where you don't have to see anybody, you don't have to fight anyone, you can rest, you can heal. It's an amazing magical item. Like you're in the middle of a big boss fight and you go bloop and disappear and heal up and then pop back. So I was thinking, well, okay, that's an incredibly powerful item that will change the way the campaign works a little bit. How can I spice it up a little bit? So we ended up putting in a butler into this rod of security who everything he does is evil and really creepy, even though he isn't at all. There's nothing he's doing which is actually bad in any way, but he just seems to be the most suspicious, like just untrustworthy creature ever. That the party they're thinking, is it cursed? Will this thing kill me? Do we use the rod? And it just puts that doubt in their heads, which I find very funny.
Oh, but yeah, when we first went, and then you're like, here is the food. And we're like, who's going to eat it? Like, we're all like very carefully going, do we go for it? And in the end, I was like, sorry, I'm sure it's fine. But there was a moment where I was like, ugh.
Exactly. Is it poisoned? And it's like, no, not this time.
What? And it's interesting about cursed items in general, because it talks about how, obviously the item description does say it's cursed or not, but even most ways of identifying it won't necessarily reveal such a curse. It's only through like hints of lore and flavorful stuff, which I thought was interesting, because I've definitely, again, and I think that's more up to the players to work out, like whether or not it's evil or not, because that's more fun, and like how dedicated they are, like, oh no, this is giving me such a great thing, but then it's slowly sapping away. Like the longer you use it, the bonuses increase, but then you have to keep making checks, etc. Like in Critical Role, Travis's character Grog had a sword that was from a big bad at some point, or an axe or something like that, and it would sap the blood and energy off other people, but then when it wasn't fed, it would sap from Grog, and he was like, I'm just going to stay awake because then I'm going to get so much power, and then happened to fail one of the checks and just killed over, like with no soul or anything like that, and you're like, oh god, we're in the middle of something, you should have gone to sleep. And yeah, it was a very interesting, because that proper turned that episode really, because they were on their way to something and it's like really big, and then suddenly we had to change it all around, use up quite a lot of magic items to bring him back, and going, this is a bad thing. You did a bad thing, Grog. Like
exactly. Curses, they're sort of role-playing pieces effectively, and some players really thrive off of having something to work around with. Yeah, as you said, like a little bit of character background, a little flavor. Don't be afraid to put a cursed item in. Obviously, you've got to reward players for being ingenious. So if they find a way around the curse, or to dispel the curse, or to deal with it, then you have to say, fair play. That's you managed to circumvent that a lot quicker than I thought you did. Well, thought you would, but here's the magical item because of it. But often, we've had cursed items in campaigns before, and you guys seem to love them by sort of playing up to the role playing aspect of it. So it can be a really fun way to give a little bit of flavor into the game, or to give the curses to be doing things that are very, very minor that someone would like to play around with. Like your barbarian has a double-handed axe, and saying that the axe, every time you wield it, you have this compulsion to flick your cape impressively before standing, moving anywhere, just like it became from like a soul of some sort of big show off or something.
I love that idea. I'm just gonna implement that throughout our new campaign. So there's the different types of variants that go into it. And this is what I love about D&D is that you say, well, here's how we done, but here's some other things you can consider. So there's 3 that's sort of in this chapter that I saw. There's one which is called more difficult identification. So when you get a magic item, obviously you could either use the identify spell, which just reveals everything of it, or you could take a short rest and like work it out, etc. So it means that people who have access to magic and don't can work it out. But they say, like, if you want to have it a bit more mystique or anything like that, just remove anything on a short rest, and it requires either the identify spell or experimentation or both. And I thought that was actually quite interesting because, again, it's like it's up to the players to go like, well, it's up to you. Like, do you want to spend a resource, which is quite, identify is a spell slot. Like you could use it, it's a ritual. So you can either have it 10 minutes and work it out, or you can cast a spell. That could be a lot of time, I guess. And then experimentation is that you just try it out. It's like, well, what do you do? And again, that has that more flavorful way of doing it. Like, I swing it around and hope for the best. I hit a tree. I strike someone and hope something happens as a result. I quite like that. It's just, again, that's that sort of thing where it's like, I guess it's almost like a skippable cutscene whereby you can like find out what things are, like taking your time about it, or you could go, I press B, oh, it's this,
And it's up to you to experiment with what you think works best. And there's no right way of doing it. And you can have things that play on some rules and not on others. There's all kinds of stuff. Maybe you leave the short rest identification in, but yeah, you find a particular sword which refuses to give up its properties until you sing it a song. And you have to work that out and identify that. And yeah, it can be absolutely anything you want it to be. Some of these variants are very, very good fun.
Yeah.
It might be more of a problem than others. If you're saying, okay, you have to identify an item to use it, and none of your party have identify as a spell, that becomes a more important thing, because suddenly they have to make friends with the local wizard or the local item shop to actually go and appraise all the items when they bring them back.
And then going on to the other 2 variants, which, again, I don't know if we've ever looked at in our campaigns or not. So you have stuff like mixing potions and scroll mishaps. And the idea that you can drink 2 potions at the same time and have different effects. I don't think we've ever done that, other than maybe a healing potion and an invisibility potion or something like that, rather than has 2 magical effects happening at the same time. And what's cool about it is that 54% of the time, they both work as intended. You're like, oh, that's quite good. And then you have stuff where it deals force damage to you because you've drunken 2 very volatile things, or it goes to the other end. If you roll 100, you're like, one of these effects is permanent, and it's up to the DM to work out which one it is.
Exactly. Your potion invisibility will become a nightmare for you.
Yeah, or just slightly hovering off the ground constantly as a potion of flying or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I thought that was, again, that's quite a cool thing, because again, it's something where you think a player would be like, well, wait, what about if we try these things? Because I know there's, again, it's somewhere in this book, but where you can test a potion, like have a little sip and then know what it is without necessarily expending the potion, which I think it's a way to work out what it is. But having the ability to be like, all right, I'm just gonna take 2. It's like, wow, that's incredibly reckless. You wouldn't do that with, like, I don't know, a Barocca and Diet Coke, because you don't know what's going to happen in your stomach.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some of the variants will offer things that work for you, and some will not. For me personally, I found the mixing potions one just so random and difficult to keep track of. I've never really bothered with it. But yeah, you're right. These things can be really, really good fun. And if you think about it, and you've got players who maybe make potions or specifically collect potions a bit more, you might want to throw something in just to spice things up a little bit. As I said, there's no right and wrong way to do this. They're really good rules.
And then going on to the spell mishaps one as well, again, you roll an intelligence check, and then you have all these other things that could happen to you if, but it's for any creature that tries and fails to cast a spell. So I thought that was quite cool, because again, like, not everyone in a campaign is a magic user, so they're just going to try and use something. It's a little bit more experimental. So it's nice to have these options for flavor. It's like, you could do this, and if it works, it'll look really cool, and you've succeeded at a great risk and possibly at a great cost. Like, some of the stuff was the first one is that a surge of magical energy deals the caster 1d6 force damage per level of the spell.
Mhm.
So that's okay if it's like a level 1 spell, but if you're thinking, get the level 6 out quickly, try something, and then it doesn't work, it's like, oh, that could be quite serious. So
Yeah, that's not going to work well for you, that one.
no, yeah, I thought those were quite cool ideas I hadn't really considered before, so I'll take them forward, I think. Was there anything that sort of stood out to you then in this chapter? You're like, this is really cool. Like, I really want to do this going forward, or anything that you're like, oh yeah, this makes a lot more sense.
I think I've never played around with using magic items as actual, really rare, unbuyable concepts, if that makes sense. We've never as a campaign really looked into having to seek magic items out on like a black market or find buyers or finding sellers or anything like that. We've always dealt with magical shops and trading warehouses and emporiums where you can kind of just, pawn off your stuff and have a sort of gold trading, because I've always found it easier, and I like to give people the option to be able to move around what they've got a little bit. But I could imagine it could be quite fun to have that environment where actually selling and buying stuff is really, really tricky. And you've got more sort of obstacles in order to actually selling that legendary sword that you picked up, or the potions that you want to buy. Maybe they're not available in every store. So I'd like to play around with that maybe sometime. Maybe having a lot more cursed weapons or items that have minor properties that will give people role-playing options. I think those could be quite fun to play on a little bit. We've never really done too much of that. Maybe forcing every magical item you've got to give you some sort of weird trait or just something minor that you could like have to play around with, like a ring of flying makes you, hover like a centimeter off the ground at all points, but otherwise does nothing else. Something really random like that.
A dud, essentially, one of those ones that you sell in the second sale, and you're like, okay, and it doesn't do as intended. That'd be quite cool.
Exactly, yeah.
I feel like for me, I think there's a lot here to unpack. Yeah, there's that sort of thing where you're like, oh god, it's a lot of tables. But actually, again, as it always says these things, you either could take the average or you could roll. It's up to you, and it depends on how much rolling you want to do before time. Because I don't know about how you sort of prepare your encounters and stuff. Obviously, like I said, I usually use the module as given, but I feel maybe rolling. I would assume that you would roll for the encounters first, like how many creatures you have, and then come to the treasure second. So probably by the time you've done your enemies and stuff, you might be, I'm done with this. I'm just gonna take the averages for stuff or put it around, etc. So I think it's good. It's good in that sense because there's actually quite a lot of stuff here. But yeah, I really like having the ability to have flavorful stuff, have stuff that you say isn't gold and isn't going to weigh them down. Because and this is me assuming, but I feel like a lot of parties don't necessarily go, well, how much are you carrying? Oh, you're over capacity, unless it's like something ridiculous. So I think when you say, well, here is the treasure, it is huge. It is about, you said 14,000 golds worth. You definitely can't carry it all. Whereas if you've got like a couple of paintings, a big ruby or something like that, and you're like, okay, here's the things. These are slightly more manageable, but how are you still going to transport it out? And having the players work out essentially another puzzle is like transportation. Do you leave it? Do you come back? All these things. So I thought, yeah, it's just a nice way of looking at stuff. And I hadn't really considered art objects as anything, because I've always assumed that they are keys to a puzzle that I've missed. So just having them as a gold value is actually really good.
Actually, making them genuinely keys of the puzzle might be quite fun. Just throw it in, confuse people.
Was there anything that you weren't particularly keen on this chapter, or is there anything else you'd change about it?
I think the one thing you need to be a little bit careful of is that inherently with anything that comes with lots of tables and lots of sort of rolling, it can be incredibly random, and you've got to make sure that it works for your campaign. It's very possible as a level 5 character on a treasure sort of table to be given like a +3 weapon from the beginning of the campaign, or to go through about 7 treasure hoard rolls and pick up nothing but basic healing potions.
Yes.
So as a DM, you've got to use your common sense to sort of maybe average things slightly, or tweak things, or just change things a little bit to suit your particular campaign. I think don't treat anything written as in stone. Use your flexibility and your common sense to make it work for you and your campaign. I think that's something that's really important to consider. So the randomness, I think, can be very extreme. I mean, if some of the tables you can roll maybe 20 on a D100 and end up with nothing but gold, and roll a 97 and end up with a magic item that's worth about 20 times what you would normally be picking up. And yes, I love the randomness of that, but I think sometimes you just got to watch that your players are getting a value and will enjoy what they're picking up.
I did notice that as well with how many healing potions you get, certainly on the earlier tables, so tables A to D, usually about the 15 to 20% when you roll, it will be a healing potion of some description, which I think is fine. But I was thinking to myself, like, well, would people have in their hordes healing potions, or would they have a different potion? So I was thinking to myself whether or not I would take healing potions out of hordes completely, and it's something that you have to stock up on at the shop. You know, you have your Resident Evil, like, what are you buying, what are you selling, and you have the potions there, but from then on you only find certain ingredients to put together to make a potion, which is very impractical out in the field. I just think I would remove potions, certainly healing potions, from the tables entirely and put something else in, or like re-roll, and just so that there's a little bit more variety and people aren't necessarily relying on, oh, it's great, we found a bunch of lesser health potions. It's like, yeah, but could have had something else.
You can rule that any way you want. Maybe you could make a system where, you know, if you've got an alchemist in the party, each potion needs 3 different things, and you've got reagents and you've got magical power giving things, and then you've got the specific ingredient of the potion, and maybe you go around finding different types of ingredients that they can start putting stuff together and going, oh, well, I can make this or that or this or that or whatever it is. Yeah, as you say, you don't want to let these tables become too bland and statsy. It's all about giving things character and individuality. That's where you're going to find the most success.
I guess then, what sort of recommendations do you have for anything magical or treasure-like? Do you have, like, is there anything, like any films or books or anything that you'd be like, oh yeah, this is a really good example of putting treasure in things, or interesting treasure thing, I guess?
Oh.
Yeah. Got you now.
That's a good question. I don't know. Have you got any examples?
I do. Sorry. So like I'll bit muffle in here. So there's actually 2 RPGs that I've come across. There's one called Artifact by Jack Harrison, which is a solo RPG where you are a magic item, and it's about, you know, you roll for what you are, and then you describe each individual sort of master or mistress or whoever that you were passed down to, and how your influence corrupts them in some way, whether it's for good or for bad, and then like what happened to them. And so you can tell the history of the rise and fall of a kingdom and stuff. And when I played it, it went all the way through sort of from medieval times all the way up to like the future. And that was really cool. Like, because it's like, I realized when I was playing, it's like, oh, actually, it's not necessarily set in a fantasy world. It could be set right now. It could be set anytime. And that was really interesting to get to that stage, to be in the future, and then just be left in a museum and nobody, because it's like, this is a priceless artifact from way back when. And you're like, no, I need to be wielded. I can't control anything if I'm just stuck in a box.
That's really cool.
That was pretty cool. And there was a similar one called Wield by Gillian Fraser and John Wick, where it's not just you, it's other players. You all create a magical item each, but then your hero that you wield is the next person's character, essentially. And you can go into fights and stuff, but you're using that hero's hit points. And if they die, you need to find a way to get into someone else's thing. And again, it's that corrupting influence you have. And again, I say corrupting as in sort of, I mean more sort of impactful. Like, you could be a really lovely, nice, chatty sword, or you could be like an evil pendant, or any of these sort of quirks that we sort of discussed here. So both of those, creating magical items with personality, I thought were really cool. And it's slightly different for an RPG. So
yeah, that's really cool stuff. That's far more interesting than anything I was thinking of in my campaigns. And so now the only sort of games I'm thinking of that sort of joy of being able to pick up stuff and create stuff is you've got games like Breath of the Wild, where you go through picking up items and equipment and decking yourself out with stuff that is specifically destructible and consumable. And there's a joy to sort of using those sort of things and going through a game like that. But The Witcher 3 is a really good example of a game where there's a very, very complicated and fiddly potion making system that you can go getting ingredients and reagents and coming up with concoctions and trying stuff. So if you want to maybe have an idea about making consumables and some of the potion rules that we were talking about, that might be a good place to get inspiration from.
Yeah, I actually haven't played The Witcher 3, which is like, what? So, but it's on the list, so I will look forward to that. Or I could just get a basic chemistry set, I guess. But Witcher 3 sounds better.
Sure, but I find troll toes are quite difficult to get in real life. The market's not as good as it once was.
Oh no, rubbish. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for that, Ryan. That was really interesting because it's something I've not really looked at in great detail. Like I said, I usually go for what is the bog standard in the actual one shots and stuff I use. So actually, it'd be nice to actually spice it up a bit and just throw something either completely random or just justify it in some way. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. It's good fun, isn't it? And what are you treating me to next time?
Oh, it's not as exciting, unfortunately.
I don't know about that.
We'll see. So I don't know about you, Ryan. I can't run combat for shit. I really struggle with it. Like I can play in it, obviously, because I know, because I only have a small part in it, but actually working out how things work and like the different types of sort of, this happens and this happens and this happens, I always lose track. So I thought, why not just go look at the options and just see what it's all about. So next time we're going to look at combat, specifically sort of the different types of initiative you can have and actually different options that players can have during combat. That's not necessarily I hit the thing or I dodge or anything like that. There's some other options that are in the DM's guide as a result. So we'll have a look at combat. Hooray!
That's really cool. Oh, brilliant.
Where can the people find you, Ryan? What are you up to? What's going on in general?
Well, typically I find myself sat in a desk chair talking on podcasts to people at very early hours of a Sunday morning. But if you want to find me, then I'm always on Discord. Come and find the Ursa Ryan Discord. You can come and chat to me. I've got a YouTube channel, Ursa Ryan, where you can hear my lovely voice. And you'll find me on many things that Fiona makes, which she's about to tell you all about.
Well, thank you for that. My name is Fiona. I run the What Am I Rolling podcast, which is a twice monthly RPG one-shot podcast. As ever, it's doing all right. I recorded a one-shot called Sleepaway recently, which is about playing summer camp counselors fighting off an evil cryptid. And that was really good. I enjoyed it very much.
Sounds incredibly weird.
It was a little weird.
I love it.
But yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite things I've recorded this year. And appreciate it's 2020, so there's not been many things to record this year. So
Indeed.
Well, until next time, friends, we will talk to you later. That's all right. Question.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.